Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Reyna Grande. I'm Kate Macmillan. I'm the coordinator of library services. In her latest book of essays, Somewhere We Are Human, Reyna talks about the joy and pain a library card gave her. Reading the Sweet Valley Twins series, she realized how very different she was from the middle-class white privileged life of those all-American girls. Instead, she felt the pain of being an immigrant was such a very different life. Reyna took this pain and created the memoir, The Distance Between Us. In it, she tells her story without self-pity and chronicles the painful results of a family shattered by repeated separations and traumas. Please welcome Reyna Grande.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be joining you this morning. I hope you can hear me okay. This is, for me, it's such an honor whenever I get invited to visit schools or to spend some time with students. I'm very grateful when teachers, schools, school districts support my work and come together, to elevate immigrant voices, which to me has been so important. And throughout my career as a writer, that is something that I have really tried to do, is to center the immigrant experience, to try to elevate immigrant stories, and to make space, right, for other voices to be heard as well, other immigrant stories to be read. And so in in my work, every time I sit down to write a book, create a book, I always think about, what am I gonna write? What story can I write for me to be able to center this immigrant experience and help people understand who we are, but also I want immigrants themselves to be able to see themselves in books, which to me is so important. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my work. I know some of you have had a chance to read The Distance Between Us, but I wanted to just give you a little overview of my other work as well, just so that you can familiarize yourself with the things that I have been doing. So my very first book that came out uh, 16 years ago now, which is incredible, was Across 100 Mountains. And this is a novel that I actually started writing when I was an undergrad at UC Santa Cruz. And when I went to UCSC, I went there to study creative writing. I was a creative writing major, and part of the senior project that we had to do in order to graduate was to write either like a part of a novel or to write a collection of short stories. And while I was in Santa Cruz, I had written a lot of short stories that I self-published in this little collection called Under the Guamuchil Tree. This was my self-published book of short stories. And then I switched over to writing a novel for my senior project. And so that's how Across 100 Mountains came to be. I wrote part of the book while I was a student at UCSC, and then I finished it after graduation. And this novel, is about a young Mexican girl living in poverty in Mexico, and her father decides or is forced to immigrate and come to the United States to look for work. And he leaves this girl and her mother behind. And I took that experience from my own lived experiences, right? When I was a little girl living in poverty in Mexico, my father came to the United States to look for work and to try to find a better life for us. But what was different in this book was that the father never returns. And so throughout the novel, my character has to abandon her home, try to make her way to the border by herself, and search for her father and find out why he never came back. And what I discovered that I did in this novel was that even though, I started it based on my own experiences, it completely went in another direction. And what I realized I was doing was that I was exploring my fear as a child that my father would never come back for me. The almost my father was gone from my life for almost 8 years, and during that time my childhood was defined by fear, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being replaced by US born children. And so in Across 100 Mountains, I asked myself the question, what would have been of my life if my father had never come back for me? And so I wrote an entire novel exploring that question and trying to imagine what my life might have been like. So after Across 100 Mountains was published, I wrote another novel that also, deals with the immigrant experience, and I wrote this novel called Dancing with Butterflies. Three of my protagonists are Mexican American. They were born in the United States, but my fourth protagonist, Soledad, is an undocumented immigrant from Mexico. And with her, I really wanted to once again, write about this experience of what it's like to be undocumented living in the United States. And Soledad is an adult who has so many dreams. She's a very, very talented costume designer. She makes beautiful costumes for this dance group in Los Angeles, and she dreams of having her own business, her own dress shop. But because she's undocumented, she encounters many, many obstacles along the way in trying to make her dream come true. So in her story, I wanted to focus what it's like, to be an adult immigrant without papers, without opportunities in terms of making your dreams possible. So after I wrote these two novels, Dancing with Butterflies and Across 100 Mountains, I finally decided that I was ready to start writing my own true story. And that's when I switched to writing The Distance Between Us. It was a very difficult book to write, if not so much craft wise, but emotional. The emotional journey of creating this book was very difficult, because when you write memoir, you're not just writing what happened, right? You're having to relive all of the moments that you experience, but also you have to re-experience all of the emotions too, like, and all of the trauma. So writing this book took me about 4 years, and there were many times when I had to put it away because the writing became very overwhelming. But as much as it was difficult to write the book, I also feel that by writing my own story, by writing memoir, I was able to set myself free in a way that my fiction did not allow me to. Because in fiction, even though I was using some of my own lived experiences to write those stories, every time the writing got hard, I would always tell myself, well, that's happening to my character, not to me, right? So there was some kind of safety, some safe distance that I created in writing fiction. But with memoir, there was no distance, right? I was the protagonist of the story. And so there wasn't, you know, any times when I could say, oh, no, 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 that's not happening to me. That's happening to my character, because I was the character in the story. And so it was very difficult at times to go back there, to revisit my childhood, to write about some very, very painful moments in my life when I was a little girl, when I was a young adult, and trying to find my way in this country, trying to survive, trying to find a way to thrive, and to allow myself dream big dreams and figure out how I was going to accomplish these dreams, how to fulfill these dreams despite all the obstacles, all the borders that I was encountering along the way, not just geographical borders, but cultural borders and legal borders and language borders, cultural borders, like all these different kinds of borders that I came face to face with, and then I had to figure out how to get across. And this book, the reason like why I appreciate having written this book is that it transformed me. I was able to understand so many of the things that happen in my life. I was able to look back on them and try to think about, what were some of the lessons that I learned from these experiences? What were some of the doors that were opened from these experiences? And it also allowed me to think about my parents in a different way, and to see that my parents were caught up in the social political climate of the time and what was happening at the time, and also their poverty and their own traumas, right, that affected or impacted the decisions that they made for the family. So I was able to then, as I finished writing the book, I I I grew in terms of understanding, comprehending, and forgiving, and coming to terms with so many of these things that happen. So at the end of the writing, I felt free. I felt liberated from so much of the pain that I had carried with me through the years because of these experiences. So after I wrote The Distance Between Us, I ended up writing another memoir after that. Um, I don't know if any of you have had a chance to take a look, but the sequel to The Distance Between Us is A Dream Called Home. And this book, I decided to write about my experiences at the university, because I was the first in my family to go to university. So I wanted to capture first generation um, college experience, right? Which so many in our community, there's so many young people who are the first in their families to go to university, to go to college. And to me, like, I feel that that's such an important experience to highlight and to write about. So I ended up writing A Dream Called Home as a way to celebrate this experience and to also give encouragement to other first gen students. And in the book, I write about my dream of becoming a published writer, and how I went about to making that dream into a reality. And of course, all the challenges that I encountered along the way in terms of, breaking into the publishing industry and going from being an aspiring writer to an emerging writer to a published writer. The other thing that I try to write about in this book was, to continue what I started in The Distance Between Us about um, the impact of family separation, right? The long-term consequences when immigrant families are separated, and what happens. What's that lingering trauma? I also continue writing about the cost of the American dream, which was a theme that I covered in The Distance Between Us. So I wanted to continue writing about that too. What's the price that immigrants pay for the immigrant dream, for the American dream? And then, of course, another theme that I was writing about in the book that I also started in The Distance Between Us was the theme of home, because when I was a little girl, I yearned for home, right? Home was something that I didn't have as I was growing up, because first my father immigrated to the US, then my mother immigrated, and my siblings and I were left in the care of our grandparents who did not make us feel that we were welcome in their home. And so for many, many years, home was something that I craved and that I longed for, that I dreamed about. And then, when I came to the United States to finally live with my father, and I thought, oh, finally, I'm going to have a home, I discovered that that was not going to be the case here either, because the distance between us was so big, and the family dynamics was so complicated because of our separation. And then, of course, added to that is all of the challenges that we had to face as a family, being undocumented and living in Los Angeles. And so home was always something that was always outside of my reach, right? And struggling with my father's alcoholism and my father's abusive behavior, the instability in his house created in me this big yearning of having a home one day. So in A Dream Called Home, one of the themes that I explore, which is in the title, is that, right? The search for home. And in the book, I write about how little by little I managed to create a home for myself. And writing has been a big part of that home that I have created for myself, because it is in my writing where I really do feel that I am home, that I can be myself. And this is why, I am very grateful that I have writing, and that I discovered writing as a way of self-expression, as a way of transforming my trauma into stories, into books that I could share with others, but also writing as a way where I could create a home that I could take with me, that I could carry with me wherever I go, so that I never feel homeless, and I mean, like, that emotional homelessness that I have felt all of my life. And so writing has given me that home that I have yearned for. And then, as you heard earlier, this anthology of Somewhere We Are Human is an anthology that I co-edited, and it just came out in June. And in this book, I was able to bring in other immigrant voices, to tell their own stories. And this is why this book is so special to me, because I have been very fortunate that, my previous books, my memoirs, have been very successful, and they're read a lot. But I also wanted to find a way to use my success as a way to elevate other voices, because I really do think that that is so important. And especially within the immigrant community, there are just not that many opportunities for immigrants to be able to tell their stories. And so with this book, we got HarperCollins, which is a big publisher in the United States. We pitched them the project, to create this anthology of undocumented immigrant voices. And the project got picked up by HarperCollins. They gave us the green light, and they gave us the funds, so that then we started to bring
Reyna,
in. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. They're having an issue on the library end and have to reboot the Chromebox really quick. Can you pause for just a couple of minutes?
Sure.
Thank you. So sorry. Oy. Yeah. Just you want to text me when you're done, or?
All right. So thank you so much for your patience. And I'm just going to wrap up talking about this book, as I was saying, about how this is a book that centers the undocumented immigrant experience. And that, one of the things that we did with this book that I'm really proud of is that we we're showcasing diverse voices within the undocumented immigrant communities, because many times people think that undocumented immigrants are all Latinos, right? Where in fact, they're undocumented people from all over the world, and so we featured like contributors from other places, like there's a contributor from Brazil, from Nigeria, from Korea, from the Philippines, from Bangladesh, from Vietnam. And so we brought in these diverse voices, but even within the Latino contributors that we featured in the anthology, there's also a lot of diversity there, because I know that many times Mexican immigrants get a lot of attention, not good attention most of the time, right? It's like negative attention, but a lot of people, when they think of undocumented immigrants, automatically they think they're Mexican. So we wanted to also have a diversity of voices within our Latino contributors. So we featured, people from like Ecuador, Argentina, Venezuela, Peru, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador. So there's a diversity of voices there. And that's why, to me, like, this is such a groundbreaking anthology, because of its diversity, and also because the whole book was created uh, by undocumented or formerly undocumented immigrants. So I really hope that you get a chance to check out the book. So many of the stories in here are coming of age stories, because most of our contributors came to the US as children, including myself and my co-editor, Sonia Guinanzaca. We came here as children. And so many of the essays and the poems in the anthology are about our coming of age experiences as undocumented immigrants. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to start answering the questions that you send in, and I'll try to get to as many as I can, but I know that I might have already answered a few of them as I was talking, but I'll still go ahead and go through these. So I'm going to start with questions about the writing process. These are my favorite questions sometimes.
Actually, Reyna, may I interrupt?
Yes.
We have, because this is interactive, we have students who are prepared to come up, and we know you
okay.
but we'd like to be able to ask them.
Yeah, no, that's much better. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to read them or if they were going to ask. Okay,
sure. We're glad that you're prepared and you know what's coming, and we're going to practice interviewing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, do you want to start with the writing process questions first, Reyna?
Oh, no, whatever you guys want, but yeah, I do love talking about the writing process.
Oh, okay. Then actually, Jesus, why don't you start?
Well, easy. Hello, my name is Jesus. My question is, can you tell us your favorite moment from the story The Distance Between Us?
My favorite moment from The Distance Between Us was my quinceañera chapter.
Yeah.
That was my favorite chapter to write, because it allowed me to revisit that moment when my sister Mago did this, threw this beautiful party for me. It was so unexpected, right? And it just came out of nowhere, because I didn't think I was gonna have a quinceañera. My father definitely said no, and my mother didn't seem that interested either. So I thought, there's no quinceañera, and then my birthday came and went, and that was it. But then my sister Mago, out of the blue, she's like, I'm gonna throw you a quinceañera. And it was so beautiful watching her work so hard to make this happen. And I would often see her, like, she would get on the phone to call her friends, trying to get all her friends to pitch in, and then how she worked extra hours so that she could have the money to buy my dress. And then of course, even my mother got enthusiastic about it. And she also started getting her friends to contribute and to be the padrinos, right? The godparents for the party. So just watching it come together and feeling so much love from my sister, it was incredible. Like it wasn't so much a quinceañera that was the gift, it was more like my sister's love that was the gift, and it manifested into this party that she threw for me. So I absolutely love writing that chapter.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hello, my name is Angel, and what were your thoughts of the U.S. before coming, and what did your thoughts change when you actually came?
Mm. Yeah, well, when I was still in Mexico, I used to imagine what the US looked like, and definitely thought of it as a paradise. You know, I thought it was gonna be like this beautiful place where everybody had food to eat and a place to live and they were happy. So it looked like paradise in my head. And then when I came here, I mean, you know, the US is a very beautiful place. And and being where I come from, where there's extreme poverty, and the poverty is like out there in your face, like there's no way you cannot see this poverty, right? And coming here, I was really blown away by like all the houses were actually real houses, and the streets were paved, and there were sidewalks, and there were all these cars. And so that to me like was just really incredible to see. But then the longer I was here, the more I realized, you know, there's also a lot of poverty here, right? And it's a hidden poverty, which I think makes it worse, because how can you combat the poverty when it's hidden? Whereas and I have seen, right, like there's so many communities, so many families that sometimes don't have food to eat here, but we don't know that because we don't necessarily like see it and interact with it. So I started to see the other side, that yes, it is a beautiful place, but it's also a place that has its flaws and its shortcomings. um, so I started to rethink the way I had romanticized the idea of the US and how it contrasted with the reality of this country. Overall though, you know, I have tried to focus on the positive and try to be grateful for some of the things that I have here that I didn't have in Mexico, that made a big difference in my life. Like the public library, for example, which gave me access to books in a way I didn't have in Mexico. And by having access to books, it made me a reader, and then it made me into a writer. And I know that in Mexico, I would have never become a reader, and I wouldn't have become a writer because of that lack of access to books.
All right, thank you.
We have Cassandra coming.
Hi. How does your book challenge stereotypes about Latinas?
How does it address the stereotypes about Latinas and Latino community?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I tried to do was to be very, very honest with the way that my family was. And I actually, you know, one time somebody asked me about my father because they thought that I was perpetuating the stereotype of the Mexican father who's an alcoholic and abusive, right? And I was kind of questioned about that. But I think that if that's the reality, that's the reality. I wasn't necessarily like writing stereotypes, but this is my father. That's how he was. Like there was no changing it. And then I thought, when I was asked that question about my father being a stereotype, I thought, when my father was drinking and hitting me, I don't think he was worried about being a stereotype. So why should I be worried about writing about him and people thinking he's a stereotype? So, but also I think for me, it was important to capture that, the family dynamics as authentically as I could. And even with my mother too, with my mother, I feel that it's a little bit different, because sometimes you read stories about, Mexican families where the mother is such a great mother, and a mother who is selfless and who gives everything of herself to her children, and she's just wonderful. And I was kind of pushing against that, because I did not have that kind of mother. Not all Mexican mothers are this beautiful, wonderful, selfless women, and they shouldn't be. There's with my mother, she was a woman that had her own dreams, her own goals, and she did not allow motherhood to define who she was. She made some choices that I felt were very hurtful to her children, but I also tried to understand where she was coming from. And now that I'm a mother myself, I have grown to get a glimpse of motherhood in a different way that allows me to understand my own mother and her own choices that she made. So I know with her, I have come to learn much more about how complicated motherhood is, and that it's not as black and white as society makes it seem, that you're either a good mother or a bad mother, but there's a lot of gray areas there that I do feel I understand more now than I did when I was younger.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gabriel. I have a question regarding the distance between us.
Mhm.
Could you tell us what your first draft was like and how long it took you to create the book?
It took me about 4 years to write the book, and my first draft was pretty messy and unstructured. I thought, because I didn't really study memoir, I didn't know how to write memoir, because almost all my writing classes were fiction, not nonfiction. So when I first started writing the memoir, I thought I was supposed to write about my whole entire life. So the first draft actually covered like 30 years, up until the age that I was when I was writing the memoir. Um, and so it was very long, and it had a lot of themes going on, and then I was telling a lot, like I didn't have a lot of scenes or dialogue descriptions. I was saying like this happened, then that happened, and then that happened, and then that happened, but it didn't really have a structure or a story arc. And then one of my teachers read it, and he explained to me that I wasn't writing an autobiography, I was writing a memoir. And a memoir is only a slice of your life, not your entire life. And then he said, think about what slice of your life do you want to share with readers? So then I sat down and I looked at the 30 years that I had written about, and I realized that the part of my life that I wanted to share with readers was my coming of age. I wanted to share about my childhood and about coming to the US and growing up undocumented in California. So then I got rid of all the other parts that didn't fit into that, and then I rewrote the entire draft, just focusing on my childhood in Mexico and then my young adulthood in Los Angeles, and that's all I put in there. And once I did that, the writing got easier and I started doing more drafts. I did a lot of drafts. I think I lost count as to how many drafts I ended up doing. The other thing I was struggling with was the point of view, because there's some memoirs that are written from the adult point of view looking back, and then there are other memoirs written from the voice that you are at the age that you're writing about. And so I was trying to decide what's the point of view I'm gonna pick, and I ended up choosing a mostly child's point of view with a little bit of the adult Reyna coming in once in a while, so that's how I ended up picking that, but it took me a while to find the right point of view.
All right, thank you.
I think we have one more question, Reyna.
Hi, my name is Celeste. My question is, what made you choose The Distance Between Us as your title, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so The Distance Between Us became my title because as I was working on the memoir for all those years, I realized that I was writing about distance, that was the central theme of the book. The physical distance when my father and then my mother immigrate, but then there's also the emotional distance. There's also distance created by language, like for example, once I learned English and my parents don't learn English, there started to be a distance between us, the distance created by assimilation, the distance between us as a family and society, right? US society. So there were all these distances. And then also later when I went to the farther I got along in my education also became a distance because my father only went to the 3rd grade, my mother only went to the 6th grade. So that meant that when I started junior high school, I surpassed my parents in their education. And so the further I got in my education, especially when I went to university, education became a distance between us. So there's all these different kinds of distances that I was writing about. And so when I thought about the title, that's the title that I ended up with, because I felt that it really captured what the book was about.
Thank you.
Hi, Reyna. I'm Jenny Lamont. I'm an English teacher here at Vintage. I'm so grateful for your book, and I'm grateful for your visit today. The bell is about to ring, so I don't want I don't want you to be interrupted, but I'm hoping the people that ask questions could stay after for a picture, maybe with Reyna and the board, if you don't mind hanging on like another 2 minutes.
Okay.
And we're very grateful for your visit today and for your beautiful book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.